Right then, Sean Spicer. The man who stood at that White House podium and defended the indefensible day after day after day. Now he's apparently decided to pop up on Piers Morgan's show to talk about Trump and democracy. And look, I genuinely don't know what he said yet, but I'm already bracing myself because this man has a track record. A track record of dodging and weaving and somehow making things worse every time he opens his mouth. But here's why this actually matters right now. We're still fighting about what democracy even means in America. We've got people in positions of influence who spent years undermining the very principles this country was supposedly built on. And now they want to lecture everyone else about founding documents? This should be interesting. If you want to watch me lose my mind in real time, make sure you subscribe. Let's get into it.
Let me go to the American one first, who's been gurning away in incredulity at what he's hearing. Sean, welcome back to Uncensored.
Right.
Apparently, democracy in America is crashing into oblivion as we show the world what real democracy is about. I would also point out you're about to celebrate the 250th anniversary of your supposed independence, which if you hadn't gone down that route, you could have had King Piers by now, which would surely have been a better bet for you Americans.
I think we're doing just fine, thank you. Look, no, all due respect.
Really?
Our former government.
Really?
Really? Yeah, really. I love it because here in America, we had these no kings protests, which is ironic from the sense that there seems to be an overlooking of the last election where Donald Trump won the popular vote. He won all 7 swing states. We had a very robust democracy. It's like when the left and the folks in the media don't get their way, somehow democracy is under attack. If you look, ironically, it was the left. It was Kamala Harris that was coronated. Maybe we should have had a no Queens rally because it was Kamala Harris that didn't have to face the primary voters in the Democratic Party to become the Democratic nominee. It was Kamala Harris that lost an election very profoundly to Donald Trump. We went through our own exercise, which is called an election, which is the cornerstone of any republic, which is what we have, just to give you guys a little lesson in what form of government we actually do have here. And frankly, I'm looking forward. No, thank you, because that's what it is. I know you may not want to call it that, but technically it's true. But I'm looking forward to the king coming. We have, as we like to say, a special relationship with Great Britain. And on our eve of our 250th anniversary, regardless of what president's in office at the time, I think there's it's very fitting for the king in particular to come over and to discuss the relationship, the formation of our country, and the current relation that we have. I think it's great that he's coming. I know that there's a ton of side issues, and there always will be at some time or another. It won't matter. There'll always be something outstanding. I'm glad that the king is coming. I think it's a great honor that he gets to address Congress as his mother did. So I'm looking forward to his visit. I'm looking for him to celebrating 250th years. But frankly, with all due respect, we don't need any lessons in how to conduct our business from the folks over in the UK.
Okay, well, little warning card there. Let me bring in John Sopel. John, is this a good idea for King Charles? Because the argument is that while there's a war raging, that's inappropriate. And particularly when the President of the United States appears to have gone rogue against this country. He's been very negative about our Prime Minister, about the country, about our military, about the way our military served in Afghanistan, which is somebody who had a brother who served in Afghanistan, I found particularly objectionable, I have to say. But is it right, do you think, that in 3 weeks, King Charles and Queen Camilla go to the United States and have a big state dinner in the middle of a raging war and so on?
I think the thing is very, very awkward and uncomfortable. I was really struck by the statement that came from the palace yesterday, which started on the advice of His Majesty's government. Yes. Like, nothing to do with me. I didn't want to go, but honestly, the government is telling me that I really ought to. And I've had it on good authority that, you know, those in Buckingham Palace, before the second state visit when Donald Trump came back to Britain, thought that it shouldn't go ahead, that he was going to be up in Scotland. He could go and visit his golf course and then pop in for a very nice dinner at Balmoral, and that should be it. And that it was too soon to give Donald Trump an unprecedented second state visit. I remember interviewing Keir Starmer. He said, well, this is unprecedented because Donald Trump is an unprecedented figure. I said, yeah, he's been impeached twice and has got a criminal conviction. As for the democracy point, and Sean's point about, don't lecture us, the 2024 election, Democrats don't seem to like it when they don't win. I 100% agree with you. The 2024 election was entirely fair. Donald Trump won it, all the swing states, absolutely no question about it. What about the 2020 election when Donald Trump lost and there were 63 court cases and the head of election security said it was absolutely fine and the attorney general said it was absolutely fine and the general counsel in the White House said it was absolutely fine and one person couldn't accept it, Donald Trump. He doesn't have a great record when elections go against him, I would just gently say.
I mean, I will let Sean come back on that in a moment. What I was
Oh, we're doing this. We're really doing this. Sean Spicer just sat there and rattled off, Donald Trump won the popular vote. Like that settles everything. Like the 2020 election didn't happen. Like 63 court cases didn't happen. Like Bill Barr, Trump's own attorney general, didn't say there was no fraud. And what does Spicer do? He pivots immediately to Kamala Harris being coronated, as if that's somehow the real threat to democracy. That's the play. That's always the play. Don't answer the question, talk about something else. Make it about the left. But here's what gets me, and John Sopel nailed it. This man cannot address 2020. He physically cannot do it. Because the moment you acknowledge that Trump refused to accept a legitimate election result, the entire "we're the defenders of democracy" argument falls apart. And by the way, can we talk about the audacity of lecturing Britain about governance? Sean Spicer. The same Sean Spicer who stood in front of the world and lied about inauguration crowd sizes on day one. Day one. That was his introduction to the American public as press secretary. These were the largest crowds, period. And now he wants to give lessons on republic versus democracy? The projection here is absolutely staggering. You lost in 2020. You tried to overturn it. Courts threw it out. Your own people said it was nonsense. And somehow, you've convinced yourself you're the democratic purists in this conversation.
say about that is I said all this to Trump's face in the last interview we did, and things got very acrimonious. I guess the argument is that in defence of America's democratic process is that Donald Trump did leave the White House, notwithstanding the fact he said the election was rigged and I didn't lose, everything else. He did leave when he was supposed to leave, and democracy was seen to be done. So it may be that he doesn't... I mean, I can remember, I'm old enough to remember when Hillary Clinton was questioning the result of the 2016 election. She used different language about it, but she was certainly suggesting that there
She didn't mount legal challenges. She was
No, it was different.
She was at the Capitol for the inauguration.
She certainly was suggesting that this wasn't a fair fight. And I think that the bottom line with, I guess, the American system, I would say, if I was an American defending it, is, well, Trump did leave. He may not have wanted to, and he might have disparaged that election and said it was rigged and so on, which it wasn't. But he did leave. So in real dictatorships, they don't leave. Let me bring in Katie. Lovely to see you. From a royal perspective, putting aside the politics of it, because I think politically this is going to be good for Keir Starmer, because right when he's under the cosh himself as a leader, he's seen an opportunity with this war to get back on the front foot a little bit and to show how big and strong he is, and he didn't go into this illegal war and so on and so on. Just because the Americans wanted him to. I think he made some fundamental errors. I think he should have allowed the Americans to use our bases, for example, at the start. I think we are a NATO country. I think that you've got to do something. I remember Margaret Thatcher with Ronald Reagan over Grenada. There was a similar issue, and in the end, privately, she criticised him, but she did support him publicly. So there's precedent for this. But from a royal perspective, they've had a horrendous 6-7 years. Horrendous. Prince Philip dies, the Queen dies, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex go rogue, Catherine gets cancer, Charles gets cancer, the Andrew scandal rages ever more furiously. It's hard to remember, really. I remember in the 90s when Diana died and so on. It seemed, very, very big at the time. The series of things which have hit the monarchy here have made it seem as perilous as I can ever remember it. This is a chance for Charles to go somewhere where they love the monarchy, broadly speaking. They don't want one, but I think there's a lot of affection towards the British monarchy. He is the king. It's the first time he'll have done this. And there's a power in the British monarchy coming together with the United States Congress. I think that moment for him will be huge. And it's just a chance to get away from the health stuff, from the scandal stuff, from the deaths that have been enveloping the family, from the rogue elements in California, and just to remind everybody that at its best, this is a great institution. You know, I see the merit of that. So although I see the argument about they should delay it because of the war and so on, I do see the power of, if Trump's invited him, I think he had to go.
I think absolutely. And I think also the one point in all of this is that when you consider Charles's reign, which is still in its infancy, this is probably the most important moment he is going to have to show that really important, I would say, fundamental role that the monarch can play, which is soft power, because he is in a position to be able to obtain and achieve something that Keir Starmer could only wish for and will never achieve. No politician can. And I think that's where you see that soft power, that diplomacy being exercised. And I think he will be magnificent when he addresses Congress. I think he will be eloquent and elegant. Someone, I can't remember on the panel, used the word enlightened. I think it was Anthony. And I think the king will absolutely be enlightened. You know, he visited, I think, America 17 times when he was Prince of Wales. This is his first visit as reigning monarch. But I think, as you say, Piers, it couldn't come at a more important moment to show really what we have the monarchy for, that important role on the international stage, absolutely crucial. And I think to fix, heal, repair, where politicians have frankly been. I mean, there's been a slanging match that has been played out.
And the one thing you're not
here.
going to get, I can guarantee it, well, pretty well guarantee, you wouldn't guarantee anything in Trump world, but I would pretty well guarantee he won't do anything negative about King Charles, certainly not while he's there. In fact, he hasn't said a negative thing about him.
Now hold on a moment, because this is fascinating. Piers Morgan just made a genuinely interesting point about soft power and the monarchy's role in diplomacy. And look, I'm not going to pretend the British royal family hasn't had a rough stretch, genuinely catastrophic few years. But here's what gets me about this whole Trump and King Charles dynamic. We're supposed to believe Donald Trump has this deep admiration for the British monarchy. The same man who reportedly showed Princess Diana's photos to friends and made comments that, well, let's just say they weren't exactly dignified. The same man who feuded publicly with Meghan Markle and called her nasty on tape before denying he said it. That Donald Trump? And now we're meant to accept that his invitation to Charles represents some genuine diplomatic olive branch? Please. Everything with Trump is transactional, everything. The man withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords, which Charles spent decades championing. He undermined NATO repeatedly. He cozied up to authoritarian leaders while insulting democratic allies. So when Piers says Trump won't say anything negative about Charles, yeah, probably not publicly. Because there's something in it for him. The optics of a state visit with a king, that's the photo op. That's the validation he craves. But let's be clear about what this isn't. This isn't relationship building. This isn't diplomacy in any meaningful sense. This is spectacle. And I find it genuinely wild that we're sitting here analysing whether the monarchy can somehow paper over the cracks that Trump's actual policies created in the transatlantic relationship.
Too respectful of the king.
I spoke to Donald Trump the morning after the last state visit in the UK. And we spoke in the morning about 9 o'clock, and he was absolutely waxing lyrical about the way the king had treated him, the way he spoke about him and the country and America in his speech. And he got on very well with Queen Camilla. He sat next to her. They'd actually gone. It's quite interesting. They'd gone, he told me, at the end of the dinner, at about 11 o'clock, King Charles comes over and said to President Trump, could we go and have some tea? And he thought he meant the next day. And actually, he meant then and there. And they went off to a side room. Donald Trump and Melania, President and First Lady of the United States, and the King and Queen, Charles and Camilla. And they went to a side room for over an hour until well after midnight, and just privately chewed the fat about we do not know what. But there's an enormous amount of affection. You know, I was talking to Jonathan Dimbleby earlier, who was Charles's semi-official biographer, but his father, Richard Dimbleby, had been the BBC anchor for the coronation of the Queen back in '53. And Trump reminded me that morning when we spoke that he had watched that coronation on his mother's knee, age 6, in New York. And it was one of the first ever televised global events. Richard Dimbleby, Jonathan's dad and David's dad, had been the anchor who broadcast it. And Donald Trump was able to see how much this meant to his mother, who had lived in Scotland until she was 18 and loved the royal family. And he inherited that love of the royal family. So this means a lot to Trump. And he won't do anything. He might whack politicians, but he's not going to whack the king or queen. And it is a chance for the royal family to have a bit of a reset. And knowing Donald Trump, after a lot of Brit bashing this year, he might see it as a good opportunity, particularly if his timeline for the war ending, which may be just before they get there, if he's right, it gives him a chance to just slightly reset things with Britain through the prism of the royal family, not through the politicians. Anthony Selden, you're the historian.
So
Am I barking up the right tree?
Irony. No, Piers. You're always barking up lots of trees, and many of them are right, Piers, at the same time. But there's a delicious irony here, which is that it was the British monarch that drove both countries apart 250 years ago. And it might well be the case, you're suggesting, and others, that it will be the British monarch that will help bring the countries together 250 years later. But I just want to ask Mr. Spicer a question, which is, which elements of the Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution of the US does he think that the current president is most articulating? Which of the elements there, Thomas Paine, Montesquieu, John Locke, you'll know all these things, Rousseau, which of the elements do you think he is best articulating in the paean of democracy that you are painting him as, Mr. Spicer? It'd be interesting for everyone to know.
Mr. Spicer.
Well, first, let me, if I can, I'll get to that in a second, but I do think that Piers is onto something. The president's admiration for the monarchy is very true and deep. And I think the idea of being able, and I would just, to some degree, argue with the premise, in that I don't think every time that you're not talking happy talk with a peer or an ally doesn't mean that you are straining the relationship. I think good friends, family members can have disagreements. And frankly, sometimes that's how you get through things, is to be able to air those grievances. So I think just because he's at this moment in time very upset with how Keir Starmer is responding to the issues in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz in particular, does not mean that the relationship is strained. That being said, I think that the proposition that Piers has put forward about the role of the monarch, in particular King Charles, is very right. The idea that they can continue to use that as a vehicle to have a further dialogue and continue to strengthen those maybe outside the role of politicians like Starmer is a good thing.
Did Sean Spicer just dodge the most direct question anyone has asked him all evening? A British professor looks him dead in the eye and says, which elements of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution do you think Trump is articulating? And Spicer goes, well, first let me talk about the monarchy. That's not an answer. That's fleeing the scene of an intellectual crime. And here's what makes this genuinely painful. The professor specifically mentioned the Articles of Confederation, which, okay, sidebar for anyone who needs it, were literally replaced because they didn't work. The whole system failed. The founders scrapped it and wrote the Constitution because the Articles created a weak central government that couldn't function. So when you're trying to invoke America's founding documents to defend someone, maybe don't accidentally reference the one they threw in the bin. But Spicer doesn't engage with any of it. Not Montesquieu, not John Locke, not the actual philosophical foundations of American democracy. He pivots straight to, the president really likes the king, as if that answers anything about constitutional principles. This is the man who stood at the White House podium and told us inauguration crowds were bigger than they obviously were. On day one. And now he's supposedly qualified to lecture anyone about democratic values, while simultaneously being unable to name a single founding principle Trump upholds. The professor handed him an open goal, and Spicer just turned around and kicked it into his own net. Spectacularly. And the panel knows it. You can see it on their faces.
To the professor's question, I would say I'm a bit perplexed by it. I mean, the Articles of Confederation were a means of governance by which we threw out, frankly, because they didn't address the notion of a federal government. It was states' rights. It was something that didn't work. So I'm not sure that anyone would want to, in current government, embrace the Articles of Confederation. I think as far as the Declaration of Independence, the president has been very clear about the pursuit of happiness, if you will, in that for 4 years of Joe Biden, we were told of folks on the right that if you didn't hew to people's pronouns and woke ideology culture, that you were canceled and censored. The president has brought back a sense of being able to express yourself, not felt punishment. if you don't agree with every sentiment that's expressed by the left or the ruling class. I think in very well so. As somebody, I tell people often, when I was a senior in college, we literally canceled our commencement speaker. It was the Health and Human Services Secretary for the first Bush that was in office because they didn't like a position of the Bush administration. For decades, those of us on the right have felt
that's obviously a bad thing.
Can I just finish? Yeah,
but
if you
it's
mind,
a long way away from what we're.
No, I was just going to finish, if you don't mind. I was trying to be polite. I thought that was a very British thing. And so anyway, I believe that the president has allowed those of us on the right to express ourselves freely and to be able to have those conversations that for the longest time, including the last 4 years of Biden, we were canceled and censored for. So I believe if you want to take the question that you asked, A, the Declaration of Independence, and then B, the First Amendment of our Constitution, which too many in this country just believe is about the press. It's also about freedom of assembly, freedom of expression. But for a long time, those that were the elites in the United States, whether it was corporate America, big tech, silenced us.
Okay, John.
I'm a great admirer of the US Constitution. I'm a great admirer of the First Amendment. I am an Atlanticist. I spent 8 years living in America, loved it. And I think that the relationship between the Americans have with our royal family is extraordinary. They don't know anything about our politicians, but they know very closely what our royal family is doing. I just think that we gave Donald Trump a second state visit to the UK. And if you're UK PLC, you would say, so what have we got out of it? Donald Trump has been, pretty damn rude about the UK as a whole, not just about Keir Starmer, but about our armed forces, about the contribution, Piers, as you were saying, about that they made in Afghanistan, which I thought was so ill-conceived. And I just, I think that the King is doing a fantastic job. In normal circumstances, I would be 100% behind the King and the Queen going to the US. But I just worry that it will be another occasion where it will be a sort of embarrassment, where Donald Trump will find himself at a podium, he'll be asked a question. It won't be magnificently controlled. I'm sure the address to Congress will be great, but Donald Trump will sound off about Keir Starmer. He's let me down. He's not exactly Winston Churchill.
That will be a problem. I agree with you. I think that's where the potential minefield could lie.
And that's the whole thing laid bare, isn't it? Look, I've been watching this entire exchange, and what strikes me most isn't even Spicer's inability to answer basic questions about democratic principles. It's the pattern, the absolute refusal to engage with substance when substance is exactly what's being demanded. Because here's what we just witnessed. A British professor asked a straightforward question rooted in actual political philosophy. Montesquieu, Locke, the foundational thinkers who shaped American democracy. And Spicer's response was culture wars, pronouns, being cancelled. As if free speech concerns about Twitter moderation are somehow equivalent to understanding why separation of powers matters. This is the playbook. This is always the playbook. When you can't defend the actual record, when you can't point to specific constitutional principles your guy upholds, you pivot to grievance. You make it about feelings. You turn, I don't have an answer, into, we're the real victims here. And I find myself genuinely concerned about what this means for political discourse going forward. Because accountability requires engagement with facts. It requires being able to say, here is what we believe, and here is how our actions align with those beliefs. What we got instead was deflection, dressed up as righteousness. The contrast is stark, and it matters. When you have leaders and their surrogates who cannot articulate which founding principles they actually support. When the response to, what democratic values do you uphold, is, well, the other side was mean to us on social media. That's not governing. That's performance. And the panel saw right through it. The expressions on their faces told you everything. They weren't hostile. They were bemused, almost pitying. Because everyone in that room understood they were watching someone fail a test he didn't even realise he was taking. This is why understanding democratic principles actually matters. Not as abstract philosophy, but as practical accountability. If you're going to claim you're defending democracy, you should probably be able to name which parts of it you're defending. Seems reasonable enough, yeah? So here's my challenge to everyone watching. The next time you see someone on television claiming to stand for American values, ask yourself, can they actually explain what those values are? Can they point to specific actions that demonstrate commitment to constitutional principles? Or do they just pivot to grievances and culture war talking points the moment substance is required? Because that's the difference between leadership and performance, between genuine conviction and empty rhetoric. If this got you thinking, I need you to smash that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to see it. And if you want to see someone absolutely dismantle the rhetorical games we've been discussing today, I've got a video queued up where Adam Mockler delivers one of the most devastating responses to these exact MAGA defense tactics I've seen in months. Genuinely worth your time. Stay informed, stay critical, and I'll see you in the next one.